Hello. Hi, everybody. It is a pleasure to see you again. I would like to start by giving thanks to the AWP for having us, for giving us the opportunity to be here and to talk about the creative writing in Spanish in the United States, and to ask ourselves if this is a movement and if this is a movement in the making. It is a pleasure and honor to present four authors. My name is Keila Val de la Ville. I am from Venezuela. And it is a pleasure and honor to present four authors from different Hispanic countries who live in the East, West Coast, and Southwest of the US, and who are notable representations of both the diversity and the excellence of the authors currently writing in Spanish and living in the US. With us today is Cristina Rivera Garza, Osvaldo Estrada, Maria Mínguez Arias, and Pedro Medina León. Cristina Rivera Garza was born in Mexico and lives in the US since more than two decades ago. She's a prolific award-winning author of fiction and nonfiction. She has published novels, collections of short stories, and poetry. Through her work, she explores culturally constructed notions of language, memory, and gender. Her recent publications include El Mal de la Taiga, translated as The Taiga Syndrome by Suzanne Jill Levine and Aviva Khanna, La Cresta de Ilión, translated as The Iliac Crest by Sarah Booker, Había mucha neblina o humo o no sé qué, and lastly and most recently, Autobiografía del Algodón. A distinguished professor of Hispanic Studies and Creative Writing at the University of Houston, Rivera Garza received the MacArthur Fellowship in 2020. Osvaldo Estrada is a Peruvian-American writer and literary critic. He's a professor of Latin American literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and has authored and edited several books of literary and cultural criticism. He's the author of El Secreto de los Trenes, Luces de Emergencia, which received the International Latino Book Awards in 2020, and Las Locas Ilusiones y otros relatos de migración, which received the International Latino and Latin American Book Fair Prize in 2020. He has recently edited the book Incurables, Relatos de Dolencias y Males, which also received the International Latino Book Award last year. Maria Mínguez Arias, who organized all this marvelous encounter we're having today. And I want to thank you for this amazing idea and this gathering. It's very nice to see you again. She was born in Spain. She's the author of Patricia Sigue Aquí, which received the International Latino Book Award in 2012, translator and journalist. Her short stories have been included in the anthologies El Cuento Por Favor, 39 Relatos Sin Vuelta, Locas y Perversas, and upcoming Enviado Especial. Her essays have been published in El Basement Journal of Literature and the Arts, the Hostos Review, and upcoming in River's Edge and the pandemic anthology Asymptomatica. Maria is the operations director at Aunt Lud Books. Her identity as immigrant, queer woman, mother, and author writing in Spanish in the US informs her work on digital memory, familial historical legacy, motherhood, and language. Pedro Medina León is also from Peru and also an award-winning author. Speaker member of the Florida Humanities Council and editor, he was awarded with the Florida Book Award in 2017. He's the author of the acclaimed novel Varsovia and also of Mañana no te veré en Miami, Marginal, and Tour, Una vuelta por la cultura popular de Miami. This book was translated, I believe, right, Pedro?
Yes, it was translated.
Mm-hmm. He's the founder and editor of Suburbano Ediciones and Suburbano.net, an art and literature journal based in Miami. And lastly, Keila Val de la Ville, myself, I'll present myself so you know who I am. And if you have any questions, I'm here for you. I was born in Venezuela. My novel Los Días Animales received the International Latino Book Awards for Best Novel in 2018, and will be published in 2021 as The Animal Days, translated by Robin Myers. I have also published a short stories book, Ana no duerme, finalist as Best Fiction Book in Concurso de Cuentos Monte Ávila Editores in 2007, Ana no duerme y otros cuentos, and the poetry book Viaje Legado. My new short stories collection, Enero es el mes más largo, you know that story, Osvaldo, will be published in 2021. I have also edited the poetry anthologies Between the Breath and the Abyss, Poetics on Beauty, and 103 Poetas Jamming. My fiction and nonfiction work has been included in several American and European anthologies. So, we are here to talk about creative writing in Spanish in the US. And I would like to mention the work of Naida Saavedra, because she has recently started to talk about movement, a new boom, what she called the Neo Latino boom in the US. According to her, the 21st century in the US has seen a phenomenon. The movement, she says, the tendency, the explosion of literature written and published in Spanish. A growing number of novels, poetry collections, chronicles, anthologies, and short stories collections by authors of Hispanic heritage or precedence, published by a growing number of houses and magazines, and offering a perspective on the challenges, the struggles, and the reinvention of the Latinx in the US, but also a window from which readers can simply access to the work of amazing writers that otherwise would remain unnoticed. Even more, the 21st century in this country not only has seen a growth in the existing independent publishing houses in Spanish and their production, but as we can see with the panelists who are participating in this table today, some of these publishers have started to explore the English market as well. The university, as you as well know very well, has taken part in the phenomenon, inaugurating what are now well-established MFAs, and recently a PhD in creative writing in Spanish, of which Cristina Rivera Garza is the director. Also, the social media have been key. They have become the net connecting the diverse authors, books, publishing houses, and academic programs that otherwise wouldn't have been integrated as a collective movement. Am I being too fast? Is it okay? Is it good? Okay, let me know, please. So, reading this description and thinking of the panelists that were participating today, I started to think about my own experience in the US, right? How do I relate to this matter we're talking about today? And how do I relate to the new Latino boom, the so-called new Latino boom, right? By Saavedra. And I thought that this description, to my surprise, because I have never taken part of anything. I as an anthropologist, like that's my background, and as a forever lover of photography, I am aware that in order to see and to understand what you see, you have always to place yourself outside. You have to be in the peripheries in order to understand what you're looking at. And if you want to write, and if you feel that the need or the urge to write, well, it's inevitable, right? You have to be outside. So I never felt part of anything, not only because now I'm an immigrant, which of course now plays a big role in this, but also when I was in Venezuela, when I think, of my past, and I go back, and I definitely see myself as someone who was always in the outside. So it was very surprising when I read this book and I found that, well, I moved to Venezuela in 2011 to study an MFA in creative writing at NYU, and then studied a master in Hispanic cultural studies at Columbia University. And after 10 years living in this country, I can say most of my productive life has evolved here in the US. My experience of the periphery as an immigrant woman, as a Latina mother, has deeply influenced my literary work. I still recognize and honor my cultural heritage and my country, of course, Venezuela, but also along the way, I have learned to see myself as something else. I have recognized myself as a Hispanic author, finding my own reality, the reality of my people, in the writings of the brilliant authors that living in the US and usually writing in Spanish also struggle to find a place in this country's literary milieu. I have learned to see borders in different scales, from the anatomical ones, the way I move and relate to others as an immigrant, to the political ones, the way I have or don't have access to certain rights and means of expression, to the geographical ones, how my past becomes more and more distant, not only in its temporal dimension, but also in the Euclidean one. My past is somewhere else. During this year, as a student, as an editor, as an author, I have experienced and taken an active role without knowing it in what Saavedra has called the new Latino boom. As Latinx or as Latinos, we share a big deal of values, aesthetic traits, common interests, and worries. Working together as one cultural force gives meaning to our own work, gives strength to our particular and common quests, and makes the experience of living in the US a richer one. So this is my experience in regards to writing in Spanish in the US and becoming a writer in the US, being an immigrant and participating from the peripheric point of view on whatever is going on in literary and social and political terms and emotional. But to get in profound waters, I'd like to ask our panelists to give us a brief overview of your personal experience with creative writing in the US, in Spanish in the US. I would like to know, how do you approach the relationship between culture, emotion, and language? And how do you connect these to your own work and experience as a Hispanic author living in the US? I would like to invite Cristina Rivera Garza to start or to continue this conversation. And I would like to know what you feel about it.
All right. Hi. Thank you, Kayla. Thank you for that introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be part of this panel. I think this panel is in and of itself a great achievement to be right here speaking about creative writing in Spanish at the AWP is something that was overdue, I think. So you have posed very, very interesting questions, Kayla, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to be developing here. Let me just offer my perspective right now. I tend to think of writing as a situated practice. The moment that I work with language, that's the moment in which I am deeply in touch with my surrounding materiality. I see writing as a collective practice, as a practice through which I connect to the speakers of the languages that I work closely with. So as you said, I've been living in this country for too many years now. And I have been able to write most of my work in Spanish from within the United States over these last 2 decades. It hasn't been easy, certainly. And part of my activism right now, my language activism, my writing activism, is precisely directed to facilitate others to have the opportunity to develop a writing career, both in Spanish and in English, or only in Spanish, or in Spanish very closely related to English. However, our younger generations decide to pose themselves around this issue, I would like to see myself as someone who is working really hard to facilitate that possibility, at least in this country. I'm not so sure. I think, let me see. I'm one of an increasing number of writers of Hispanic and indigenous heritages coming from Latin America, coming from Spain, and finding in the United States places to make a living, places to develop that life as a writer. And as I've been writing, it seems to me, I don't see myself as separated from Latin American literary traditions or traditions that come in different languages, including indigenous languages, developed in what we call, generally speaking, the Spanish-speaking world. So much of what I've written, even though it's been generated from within the United States, it's been very much in a dialogue with, in conversation with those traditions that I'm very close to, and that have continued to nourish my work. I don't see a deep divide. And in fact, I see my writing practice as a bridge, as a way of continuing a conversation that is central to what I do. As it is equally important, the conversation that I try to maintain with literary traditions that are lively in the United States. I'm not as close to all of them. We live in a very diverse country, but I can tell you that what I've been reading, talking about, teaching about, related to certain experimental traditions in the United States have been as central to my writing as my connection to Latin American and indigenous literary traditions. So, as I say, I see myself as one of many. Writing to me is a way of being in connection with. Writing is pure accompaniment, as Fred Moten once said. So there is no way for me to conceive of my practice as a writer and to see myself as an isolated being. There is no such a thing. Once I start to work with language I acquired, I see a responsibility. I'm working with materials that are not my own. I'm working with forces, with materialities that come embedded, that come marked with the history of many. And I think, to me, that's just as relevant here as in any other part of the world. That comes with writing. Writing is more than just telling stories. Writing is to think carefully and ethically about our tools, about every single aspect that we touch and that we become accountable for as we write. So I said, as I started this paragraph, that I see myself as one of many. And in that sense, I think of all of us as a movement, more in the informal sense of the word than in the formal interpretation of the word. I don't know yet of any manifesto. I don't know yet of any set of rules, to belong or not to belong. I'm not concerned about that. What I like and what I celebrate today is this wonderful energy, the possibility of being in touch, of speaking out here in the public arena about practices that have been with us and that have been central to this country for a very long time. We, of course, are not the first one writing in Spanish in this country. We are heirs to a long and very important tradition that has been neglected and that has been erased in many ways. What is different now, what I think might make it different in the future and for future generations, is that educational institutions are paying attention to what we are doing. And they are opening up spaces so that MFAs and PhD programs are now seen as natural, as important components of educational programs. So I've read Mexican American literature. I read Chicano literature. I'm enamored of the work that Puerto Ricans and Caribbean and people from the Caribbean have written in the United States. I know, I happily, I rejoice in the fact that I'm not alone, that I have this context behind me, with me, that I am part of something that is way larger than myself. But now We have 3 MFA programs in creative writing in Spanish established for a number of years. Of course, the UT El Paso program has been there for, don't let me lie, but it's more than 15 years. It's the one that has been up and running for the longer period, I believe. And there is a program in the University of Iowa, the NYU program as well. We at the University of Houston have launched recently the first PhD program in creative writing in Spanish in the country. And I think all these, at least our program, was long overdue. There are many of us writing in Spanish. There will be more, because this is the immigration pattern in this country, because Spanish is not a foreign language where we live, because Spanish is a language that keeps us together in connection with others as well. And well, I can't talk about this for hours. Let me just the new Latino. I've been living in this country long enough to have gone through already several new Latino booms. So last I knew, we were in the new Latino boom. So I guess now we're in the new Latino boom, and I'm fine with that. As far as we can speak openly and provide newer generations with paths into this writing life, I'm fine with that. We need to keep struggling and fighting for opening publishing houses, agencies, fellowships, residencies, grants, because that's what younger generations are going to need to develop these writing lives in Spanish, in connection with English in the United States. And I think that's, I'm very committed to that. The past is never the past. The past is with us. We are activating it, revising it, and providing, I think, alternatives for the future every time that we dare speaking about these enormously important aspects of writing in the United States as of today. I guess I'll stop there and I'll let you speak. Please, just I'm done, I guess.
Thank you, Cristina. So wonderful and so inspiring. Great. Thank you. I love the freedom and the faith together. Those two feelings in your way of approaching this subject, and I feel that those two things together are very powerful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Osvaldo, Osvaldo, what can you tell us about this matter?
I don't know what to say now after Cristina has said everything. I'm like, whoops, I was going to say that, but no, she's already said it. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel, for this invitation, Maria and Kayla. And it is really an honor to be here with all of you. I of course, agree 100% with what Cristina has said. And my story is a little different because I was born here in the US. But I was just born here, conceived here in the US, born in the US. And when I was 4 months old, my parents went back to Peru, our homeland, and I lived there till I was 14. So when people ask me, why is it that you write in Spanish? Well, it's because it's my native language. It's my first language, and I have lived the immigrant experience, and I still, live it. I given my culture, my accent, and so on. For me, I can't conceive of course, I can write in English because I've lived here for so many years now. But writing in Spanish is sort of my way of going back home, something that we always desire as immigrants, even if it's not possible, even if the return is impossible, even if it's not advisable, not the best, not even an option for you. But I think that every single immigrant who comes to the US always longs for home. And I write in Spanish because it is my home, and it's my homeland. It's the place where I always feel more comfortable in, even if I can express myself in English. I also write in Spanish because it allows me to connect with other immigrants here in the US, other people who've had my experience. And I think that's at the core of, the mission of the true writer, of the true intellectual, to use your voice, to give voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Of course, you can speak, but you know, being able to project your voice and to let others know of your experience. And so I think that several of us as writers have the tools to do this, to give our voice to those who can't speak for themselves, who wouldn't have been able to write these stories. It doesn't mean, like Cristina was saying, that we're writing in isolation. We are always connected to other cultures, our own cultures from, you know, where we come from. But in my particular case, I think that immigration is always at the core of my stories, because that is who I am. That is what I know the most. I left Peru when I was 14, so I am an immigrant. I'm not the same Peruvian who left his country when I was 14, right? Even my slang in Spanish sort of stopped at that point. So I use expressions in Spanish, and I'm sure that Pedro has had the same experience because you came when you were in your 20s. That language evolves, but you sort of keep that as your safe place, and you use that and the traditions that you're bringing from your home country, and you of course adapt and start new dialogues here in the U.S. I do think that something has changed dramatically. Yes, it's true that that we have been writing in Spanish for centuries here in the U.S., but there's sort of a sense of community. I remember when I was going to school here, I'm talking about high school in the 90s, in the early 90s. Um, yes, you could write in Spanish, but there were a few journals where you could publish in Spanish. There were certainly not very many publishing houses that would publish your books in Spanish here in the US. Some here and there. And if you think about it, Suburbano, Sudakia, Ars Communis, all of these publishing houses, they're like 10 years old, 8, 7 years old or so. So something has changed. I don't know if I'm comfortable with the word movement 100%. And just to give credit to Cristina, about 10 years ago, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cristina was talking about new Latino writing. I remember reading one of your articles a while back, and you were saying, you know, these are, you know, new Latino writers who are not writing in English, but in Spanish, and who are not necessarily coming from Mexico, but from other parts of the Spanish-speaking world. Something is going on, and I think that something is the community that we have formed, I think, over the past decade or decade and a half or 2 decades, that we're no longer talking about, or not necessarily, not everywhere, about Cuban American literature or Mexican American literature, Chicano literature, or Puerto Rican literature, but we're sort of in this together, and you see it in every single anthology that has been published just in the last decade, where you have writers from, I'm going to think about the collection that we just edited with Kayla, Incurables. You have writers from Venezuela, from Colombia, from Argentina, from Peru, and from other places, but we're not necessarily dividing ourselves, but sort of seeing the points of connection, you know, in terms of our writing, our experiences as immigrants, and so forth. So I don't know if I've gone in the wrong direction with this, but I hope that that we can continue talking about these issues over the next few minutes.
Yeah, I feel the idea. I think it's great what you just said, and I do believe that this feeling of accompaniment, of going together, of being part of something, might be relatively new. Not new, but new. I don't know. You would know more than myself because I've been here only for 10 years. But so I would like to ask you, Maria, how do you see it? How is your experience as a Spanish queer mom who writes in Spanish in the U.S.?
Well, first of all, my name is Maria Mínguez Arias, and thank you. I am so grateful to be able to convene here today. After listening to Cristina and Osvaldo, I'm scratching my head. What can I bring to the table? First of all, I am incredibly energized because I see so many points of intersections where I think we come from the same experience and understanding of what we are living, and I am really excited about that. So I'll spend a couple of minutes telling my story. I've been living here for a little bit over 2 decades. I came to the United States at the age of 25, I believe. I had already been through university and studied journalism. I was trying to create my own path towards creative writing. I never heard of such a thing as creative writing programs or anything like that at university. So what happened is all I could land were low wage, labor intensive temporary jobs. And so I decided I would try to escape that by coming to the United States, work for 1 or 2 years, make a lot of money, go back home and open some sort of home-based business where I saw myself writing um, for um, for companies and on my spare time writing. Except that when I was about to complete my second year, I meet the person who is now my partner. We have 2 children, and today I am here. I basically end up creating a life in the United States. And it's a kind of a difficult situation. I think we've all lived through it because, okay, I want to stay in the United States. I want to live here, but I am a writer and I write in Spanish, and Spanish is my language. And this is the first of many crossroads where I have to make a decision. So I stopped working at the electronics company where I was working and making a lot of money to go back to Spain. And I decided to turn into translation. I thought at the time that it was a genius idea. Translation would allow me to remain close to my language and to continue writing. So I got my certificate in translation studies and I became a translator. And I have to say the experiment worked. I was able to translate and write for many years. But what I think I really want to speak of is of the solitude that I felt during all those years. I am writing, and I am literally writing alone. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I feel like I really, really want to find peers. I need peers to converse with. I need other peers to have my writing converse with their writing, and I can't find it anywhere. I am not kidding. I am talking about going to Craigslist and meetups and coffee shops announcements, and I just want to find somebody, and there is nobody around. At this point is when I think the bilingual MFA out of the University of Texas in El Paso has been working on for a few years, and I find it on internet and I get really excited, and I tell myself that I'm just going to enroll myself there and get my community until I see the price tag and I realize, what are you thinking? You have 2 little kids at home. Okay, forget the MFA. At the end, my resort is enroll myself in a writer's workshop out of Spain online. And it's under their umbrella that I start writing and planning my first novel. And I have to tell you, I finished my novel, I published my novel, and I'm still feeling very much alone. I have no connection to the academia. I don't know anybody. And I make a decision that I am so glad I didn't follow through, which is that I would write in English. I am willing to give up my language just so I can be part of a community of writers. And I literally start my next manuscript in English. And that is when my novel wins the International Latino Book Award. And it's because of social media. I joined social media because I am trying to promote my novel. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a second, what is happening in this country? There's a PhD opening up in creative writing out of Houston. There are more presses than I thought there were. There are more writers. There are magazines. That is when I started making all these connections. So what I want to speak of is the isolation, and how what I think that this might be different from the past. And I think it's the digital interconnection that it's allowing people like me not fall through the cracks and keep writing. That is my personal story, but I do want to talk about, because you ask about the connection between, what is it that you were asking about, a culture, emotion, and language. And I think about it, isn't that the basis of all writing? Well, it is the basis of my writing. And I would add to that memory. I think of memory as the driving force of my writing. Memory, individual memory, familial memory, collective memory, and what had happened to those pillars of my writing is that they kind of shaped, have grown over the years just by living and writing in this country. I think what happened is when you cross borders, and now I'm talking about any type of borders to connect with what you were saying. I'm not just talking about physical borders or cultural, linguistic. I'm talking about emotional borders. I'm talking about gender borders, any sort of borders. I think you become a sort of hyper-vigilant transient. I think I'm pronouncing okay, I hope. Where you are inhabited of sort of different spaces at the same time, and you develop all these skills that they allow you to live and write in all these different spaces. And I think the result is it's a body of work that it kind of moves and is transient. And when I think about it, that's how I think about the writing that all of you in this panel are doing, and all of us in this so-called movement. I think we are producing very tangent writing that is rich and diverse, and that is luminous, and that it's connecting, like Christina was saying, with traditions past and present. I think by being able to occupy all of these different spaces, we are acting with our writing as vassals between different literatures and traditions. And I think that's where I land. I land also as a queer woman, Hispanic, and I'm occupying all these different spaces, and growing in my commitment to literature, LGBTQ literature, to work by women, to work by us, Spanish, writing in Spanish in the United States. I think that's kind of where I am right now.
Thank you, Maria. Pedro, what do you want to share really in regards to the creative writing movement in Spanish?
Thank you very much, Kayla, Maria, for organizing this, and I really feel honored to be part of this panel. I don't know what else to add because I think that it's each of you have shared your own experiences, and we have a lot of things in common. And actually I have some notes here that I brought that I will have to change completely, because if I say the same, I will repeat exactly the same things that you have said. But I will say that in my own experience, I moved to Miami in 2002. I study law in my country, in Peru, and I leave my country, moved because I didn't want to be a lawyer. When I was studying, I realized that I want to write other type of things, not legal documents. So that's what I leave my country, basically. I came to Miami with the idea of being working in whatever thing possible, and then to see what to do, maybe going to Spain, to New York, or whatever. But things happen, and I start assimilating to the city. I start being more feeling this Miami like my place, and finally I stayed here. And what happened to me was that I started writing since the very first moment, and I realized that Miami is a city, is one of the most Latin American cities in the United States, but I realized that I was alone in my own thing of writing, because I didn't knew anybody who write. I just knew a couple of journalists, Cuban journalists, but they have already their community thing organized, their anthologies of Cuban authors. And so I started with a blog, a personal blog, which was named Suburbano. It's the same blog that we know now. And I started with Suburbano and started posting things that I was reading or something. meaningless. And yeah, I also I invite a couple of friends, one from Mexico, one from Spain, and to write. And then a lot of people start to getting in contact with me because of that blog. Hey, because I have there like a banner or something like that. It's cultural, like to our roots here in the US, writing in Spanish. That was my my banner in the top of the blog, and I start like sharing some book reviews, chronicles, and I started receiving a lot of people who wanted a space to write. They need a spot in the blog to write. Oh, what's this? Oh, can I send you like a book review? Can I send you a short story? Yes, of course. And that's how it started to grow. And it never stopped. Started to grow. Now, well, then we opened this. We have now this publishing house, which is Set Suburano Ediciones. But before that, we had another publishing house, which was oriented only in ebooks, because what we wanted to do was to create that bridge, that connection between United States, Latin American literature, and European literature. We want to create that bridge because we feel that there was no connection and between these three places where our literature is written. And we started publishing these ebooks. Why? Because ebooks were easy to move from one place to another. You just click and download and read, and are cheaper at least than a book. But it didn't work. Why it didn't work? Because people don't like to read ebooks. Now, I think these days, people are reading more ebooks than 8 years ago or 9 years ago when we started the digital magazine, the ebooks publishing house. But now that we have well, after that it didn't work, and we started with this small independent publishing house. We have same thing. It happens the same thing that happened before with the Suburbano web and with the ebooks. We started receiving tons of manuscripts. I only read scripts. I don't read for like reads for my own pleasure, books for my own. No, I'm reading since 3 years ago scripts, and that's it. It's incredible. So going to the idea of language, how I feel, or for me, I think that when I realized what was happening, I don't know. I don't think of movement of being no, but when I realized what was happening, I understood that we were kind of responsible for building these bridges, for creating all this community that we have right now. Because now I don't know if there's a new Latino boom or however we wanna name it, but we have this dialogue, we have this community, and I don't know. For me, it's wonderful. When I moved here in 2002, I didn't have anything. So basically, that's my point of view. Yeah.
It's amazing how, in your own experience, we can see how there was actually a need to express ourselves, and how we have been looking for many years now in the new, however we want to call them, but how we have been looking and making for ourselves a space and creating niche, even more thinking outside these little boxes, because there's those boxes in which we are, but there's also that feeling of belonging, of being one. How do you say it, Christina? One among others, one as many others, how you said it so beautifully. Like, in a way, yes, there are these boxes. There are these, definitions that make our own identity. But at the end, what we're doing is, and this takes me, what we're doing is create, strengthening this common ground that projects us to the future, as long as it connects us to the past. So I think that is like what I can feel, what I can take of this, so multiple conversation that is going on in this moment is that, right? Like that, what we bring from back there. How do we project it forward? And how do we connect with others, regardless of those boxes that will be always there? It's part of our identity, but how do we start like creating those vessels you were talking about, Maria, before, right? Between one and the other. So nice. So this conversation has been awesome. Very, very nice and fluid. And I have some questions for each of you. What I'm going to do, because I don't know how long we're going to have. I mean, I know how long we have now. We still have 14 minutes to talk a little bit more. But instead of, I'm going to do just one question for each, and then if we can, I'll do a second round. Okay, so we all have the opportunity to talk a little bit. Cristina, you said in one interview, and I loved it, you said that you see borders wherever you go. And you said these sometimes visible, sometimes invisible lines allow us to, or won't allow us to cross, depending on the bodies we inhabit. I feel that sentence is in a very deep communication with what we are talking about right now. And I would like to know if you could kind of draw a little bit more about it, because I find it fascinating.
Thank you again. This is very enriching, really. I'm very grateful to be part of this conversation right now. I was born on the U.S.-Mexico border, on the Mexican side of the Rio Bravo. And I am a member of an immigrant family. My grandparents migrated from central Mexico up north in the early 20th century, just trying to find a better place to live. And my maternal grandparents, who had crossed the U.S.-Mexico border very early in the 20th century, were expelled back, became deportees in the 1930s. Right after President Hoover enacted a series of anti-immigrant policies very similar to the ones that we've seen developed in this country in the last 4 years. So when I'm talking about the border, I'm speaking in a very literal, material sense of borders that really break people apart, borders that separate families, borders that are the site of cruel, unnecessary violence, borders that truly affect the way in which we walk, think, relate to others. At the same time, as these kind of very strong violent-based borders are developing, I think there is that other energy around, and that's people creating communities, people getting together, people just working with others in order to make their lives more fulfilling. And I think that's when writing comes into place to me. I cannot see writing as something that is done in these ivory towers, writing to me has always been a practice, a community making practice. I've said that many times, and I've said it because I truly believe it. It is through writing that I was able to connect to the places I've lived. And certainly I share the experience that Maria and Pedro and Osvaldo have spoken about, that sense of isolation, that sense that we have to be proactive and dynamically involve ourselves in creating those communities, and we do it at several levels. I came to this country to do a PhD, and so the academic setting has been the place where I feel that more familiar with. And so that's very much the place of my activism right now. But I understand that creating those writing communities goes well beyond the academic borders, and that there are communities that are developing writing practices that are not necessarily, and they don't have to be necessarily, literary practices. Writing goes way beyond that. And so I think a truly critical view of borders would have to embrace these many variants of writing practices that keep a community together. If nothing else, because that's the way we create narratives that we share. And narratives are powerful. That's why writing is such an enormously important political practice, because the way we tell stories, the way in which we represent ourselves and others, the way in which we bring into view our most intimate experiences, all those aspects and more are involved in the way in which writing makes community. And that's the reason why I'm speaking about activism. I think that's what we do, and not only because we live in the United States. I think that's what we do if we write anywhere in this world. Right now, it just so happens that we live in one of the most violent regimes in this world, one that is characterized by what we've seen this week. Tremendous turmoil, calls for a growing authoritarianism, neo-fascist tendencies, and that's when writing is increasingly more relevant, because something that to me is central to what I do is our critical capacity, the possibility of seeing alternative worlds, worlds that might become habitable spaces for others. So as we move together and we try to create these spaces, these listening spaces, these spaces where the voices of many can be heard, I think that's one of the aspects of writing as a community making practice. And not so much speaking for others, but creating the public spaces, a public arena where these powerful voices can be paid attention to and can be listened to in ways that they deserved to be listened, because we are here. We're not going anywhere. We're members of an incredibly hardworking community, and we're here to stay.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you. Osvaldo, you talked a little bit about the so-called Neo-Latino boom, and you talked a little bit about, is this a movement in the making? And I think we have been talking about this since the conversation started. But I would like to know, for you, as an immigrant who is not an immigrant, but who is an immigrant, because you have all these stages, right? We all have those, but you have your particular ones. What is the emotional dimension of this phenomenon for you?
I'll try to go to the point so that we all have a little bit of time to talk during the second round. Thank you for the question. I think that it's wonderful to know that we are starting to have this sense of community that we didn't have before. I can identify with what Pedro was saying earlier, that, you know, in the 90s, in the early 2000s, you couldn't really find a sense of community. Whereas now, you know that if you want to publish a short story, you can send it to Pedro, you can send it to someone else here and there. And we have options, right? Which we didn't have before. And it's nice to know that even though we are far away from each other, when Maria was talking, you know, that she's by herself in San Francisco, I'm like, next time I'm in San Francisco, I want to visit her and get together and do this. But we didn't necessarily have that before. And I think it does make writing so much easier and nicer, precisely because we are alone, and precisely because of the political times that we're living in, as Cristina said, that, you know, our language does not have a state, and that creates a really negative situation for us, you know, and so it's nice to know that we have our peers in this sense of otherness, and that we are together. So I'm really happy and thankful to have you know, this community that we are recreating here, but also to be a part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Osvaldo. Yeah, as soon as all this pandemic thing ends, we're gonna get together everywhere.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And hug each other and kiss
Yeah,
each other.
and kiss.
I have a beer.
Yeah, or two.
Of course. Maria, Maria, I would like to know, how do you describe your experience as a queer Hispanic and female writer, and how do you see that intersection? You were talking about communicating
Yeah.
vessels between them, and I would like to know a little bit more, because I know that for you, those elements of your identity are very informative. For you, are very important, and I think that Christina was talking about activism, and I know that I think all of us, for different reasons, and moved by different experiences, are really working towards creating a stronger activism in from our own perspectives, and I would like to know yours.
I'll try to be brief. There's been a progression, and I am arriving in the last couple of years. I think the political environment has certainly helped the last 4 years, and I basically had arrived at a point where I made a commitment as an author to really, really support the work of queer writers, queer women, and also the writers within trying to create a body of work writing in Spanish in the United States. Um, I'm not sure that I'm exploring different themes that I would have before making this commitment, because I'm still exploring the same things that have always interested me, but I'm certainly purposely using a very specific point of view that I think has been historically lacking, and I will continue to pursue those particular point of views. You will find the queer women, the women from the past, the present, or the future in my fiction. And the commitment goes on, and I will just speak of it briefly, but I am just taking this leap where I started to review the work of women authors in the United States, just because it has to be done. So I am learning and I am doing it. And I am also developing a writing workshop that I never thought, 5 years ago, I would say, are you nuts? Not anymore. There's a need. I want to accompany the writers, the people who come into writing from these spaces other than the literary norm. I want to help other writers to incorporate their otherness into their writing. And that's where my commitment and activism, like Christina was speaking of, it's heading right now. And I'm really excited about it.
Thank you, Maria. Pedro, one thing that really moved me when I read your tour was how you, and in Americana, you reconstruct Miami's history. But in one from a chronicle point of view, and the other one from a fictional point of view. And I would like to know, how do you connect the interest of making the city in which you live, writing about the city in which you live and feeling that you belong to it? How do you feel that connection? I find very interesting the way you kind of appropriate and translate Miami to others from a very emotional and interesting point of view, from the chronicle perspective and from the fictional perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Miami is, I guess, the most underestimated city in the world, right? Mm-hmm. Latin Americans, Europeans, even people who live here in Miami underestimate the city. I started reading a lot about Miami since I moved here, and I realized that the history of Miami and the culture of Miami, it's very, very interesting. And there were a lot of things happening before the 80s in which we as Latin Americans think or believe that there was nothing before the 80s in Miami, but no, there were a lot of things very interesting happening. And then after that, again, with all the sense of creating community, I will add to Tour and Americana, for example, the anthologies that I created, that I edited, Viaje One Way and Miami Unplugged, which gather all the authors that were writing here in Miami for a long time. And that's basically my idea of creating communities by sharing the things that I've learned, that I know, with those books that I write in chronicles, and from a fiction standpoint, recreating a historical passage of the history of Miami, and also with the anthologies, because I want to share all the things that I learn about the city. I want to create a community of writers, and that's basically, I think we run out of time, but I think basically that's my core, or my path is to create a community of writers and authors and readers. And this, for example, we have done things with every one of you. Today we have published an interview of Cristina Rivera Garza in Suburbano. We're going to publish an anthology which appears Maria, and I guess all of you, which is Enviado Especial. So this is community, and I really, really like this. This is wonderful for me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I found very, very beautiful the way geography and space and history of Miami kind of talks about your own relationship to identity and to your work. So, well, time is over.
Yeah.
This was too fast, too quick. Yeah. So we have to do this again.
Yes.
This was a beautiful, very informative and warm conversation. Yes. I think that is what we need, and this is what we are creating every day and through our work. So it's I really deeply celebrate the opportunity to share this moment with you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Thank you.